Hello, welcome back to Parley, the show where you folks support the other stuff I make by paying me monthly to talk about the topic of your choice. And this month, Lordrusty has chosen Mr. Blue. Mr. Blue is a being. There he was just there, in my gastrointestinal tract that was brought forth from the blind eternities, of course. And I'm going to redo the parlay request, and then we'll introduce you. Ahoy, says Lordrusty, starting nice and confident with this one, keeping the existential dread at bay. For my September parlay, I have another image-based request. Ah yes, these have been popular lately. I enjoy a channel on YouTube which creates videos in which every individual line of a popular song is fed into Midjourney, probably an image-creating AI, as an individual prompt. Well, we could have a lot of interesting discussions about which jobs are going to be redundant first, creative or manual labor, and other philosophical topics which jump to mind upon encountering these AI-driven tools. I'd instead like to ask, who is this entity, known as Mr. Blue, which Midjourney has shown us glimpses of? First, I'm going to show you guys pictures of that. And there it is, without any warning. If that scared you, I'm not sorry, because this scared me when I looked at it in the parlay request thing. And we're gonna cycle through the other Mr. Blue pictures. So we got this one too, and there he is. This personally, I like this one the most. We're gonna come back to that one a lot, and then there's this one. This one I find quite unsettling. This doesn't really have a lot to do with the request you made, so just quickly. You see on the right side of the image, did the AI create like a Chinese character signature watermark thing on the image for like a person that doesn't exist for itself? Question mark. Anyway, that's what? So I know you said we're not talking about the AI thing, but that's interesting, isn't it? Anyway, cool. Rusty continues, it's clearly some kind of eldritch creature, of course. But what are Mr. Blue's powers and abilities? What does it want from us, if indeed we can understand what such a being wants? Is it in fact simply another form of Glorb in disguise, as an unknowable abomination? Something more sinister? Or perhaps a member of a color-based pantheon? One can only imagine what a mixed magenta or a Miss Green would look like. I leave this one in your hands. Ah, yes, of course. An expert in this type of subject. Where to start? I will do what I think is the more interesting way to do these. A lot of the time when people request these types of parlay, I've noticed that I don't go for as long, which you may or may not want. I'm gonna fiddle a little bit this time. I'm gonna try a few different approaches instead. So first, we're gonna go straight forward. What has the AI made? What do we think? We'll do it straight up. Then I'll take a couple of different interpretations. So let's look at the pictures again. I know they're quite unsettling. Now we are gonna put them over the whole screen. I think you really need the impact of the full image. There's rather a lot of detail in these images, in my opinion, that feels important. And I want you to get the full scale of these eldritch creatures. So that's important. And obviously, if I put this on the screen and I'm just sort of in the corner, you're not going to be able to focus on anything else. So anyway, that's what we're doing. Okay. So a bit of further analysis on these. And during this first segment, we'll also spend a lot more time with these images so that we don't need to keep going back to them in the other ones. So for the first one, we've got this background. This is maybe a standard background. I don't know. And you can see Mr. Blue here has some kind of bat wing-esque protrusions. Is that an outfit? This one looks much less humanoid. You've got the mound. You gotta have the mound. One eye, of course, and some milky tendrils. That's what those are there on the part below the eye. I almost said the beard, but nay, it is not the beard. So, to me, this suggests a very common eldritch ability, shapeshifting. Clearly, Mr. Blue here is in the process of manifesting the necessary details, perhaps mimicking the human form to the degree that it feels is necessary. There's no need for depth perception, after all, so more than one eye, simply not necessary. The bat wings, very interesting. Doesn't seem like from that angle you would be able to fly, but it's possible that this is just how they're morphing out of the being's body. So jury's kind of out on that. Flight? Question mark. It also looks like on the sides there you can see it's just kind of mush or like a slick, almost suggesting that in the later images, perhaps that suit is part of the creature's body rather than a piece of clothing. So moving on to the second one. Again, there's some questions. That doesn't look like the same stature that Mr. Blue had before. This is a more broad set shouldered figure, again suggesting considerable morphology and perhaps just mimicking elemental aspects of the human form so that we can resonate with it. You gotta have the ascot. That's classic. You gotta have that. I like how the suit is just a mess. It's just there's paint splatter everywhere. There is no right arm. You can see on Mr. Blue's left, our right. They've got what looks like an arm there, sleeve. The other side, nope, no arm. not a one. There's some. I think this one is quite pretty. It's you get the hair. The whole thing is just hair, and some cosmic dandruff coming off of the head. That's what you can see up there. That's going to be cosmic dandruff up there. If we go with the Pantheon interpretation, perhaps this is how Mr. Blue creates the stars, but we're not quite there yet. So yes, I don't think there's a set form here. It does kind of seem like fine detail is not something that this creature finds natural, necessary, or easy. Not sure which. The next one, we're going to get the most facial detail. And I know this is the one most people probably don't want me to stay on for as long, but it's disturbing. But you can see in this one that Mr. Blue has attempted to manifest as a human-ish form, a little stereotypically alien as well. The eyes, it's just, there's that kind of spiral thing on the left eye, our right. The suit has a little, is that a bullet hole? Is that the corporate logo of the Eldritch Enterprise from which this being hails? You know, these things are not known. Is that the moon just kind of casually in the background to the left of the image? And then on the other side, there's that like watermark thing I mentioned. I also find the format of this one interesting. Is this a photo? You see the frame of this one? Interesting. I find it very fascinating. I'm trying very hard not to talk about the AI thing, but I find it really fascinating why the AI would choose certain backgrounds over others. And there's considerable lighting and stuff. I don't know. There's a lot. I don't know how this particular AI works, but it's really, really interesting, I think. Yeah. Okay. So a lot to go off of. You can see that there's an element of the elemental elements. I can't believe that's a sentence that just came out of my mouth. This sentence brought to you by Mr. Blue, influencing my thoughts. An element of elemental elements in the images. That's the thing I actually just said. $9. I just... I'm not going to say what I was about to say, but yeah, we can go from here. So straightforwardly, it seems like Mr. Blue is a beyond understanding entity that feels the need only to copy the broad strokes of humanity. A creature with such morphology and relative sophistication, as we've seen in these images. Well, I don't think that it's because it's difficult to mimic human features. After all, looking at the suits, the clothes, part of its body, of course. But the clothes on images 2 and 3, we can see that these are complex forms. The face, being more simplified, must be a matter of having no need for it to be more complex, not because the creature is incapable. The blue. This suggests some form of identity. That's interesting to me. Why does it always have to be blue? Why is there this defining trait of blueness? Now, blue, an interesting color, blue. Blue is a very unnatural color. You know, in nature, we don't get very much blue. Very few things are blue. Blueberries are kind of purple. You know, they're not really blue for various biology reasons that I'm not an expert on, and it's not that uncommonly known. You can go look it up. But we don't have a lot of blue in nature. So that's interesting. Perhaps the blue is a way to differentiate oneself. There's a need for terror, and this is where I think everything pieces itself together. You see, 2 of the 3 images feature suits, and we've picked a color that most humans would instinctually look at and think, that is not natural. That is the blue. I think evokes that in a way a few other colors do. So unnatural, so blue, so saturated too. This evokes the eldritch nature of the creature at a glance, with little language, and indeed, 2 of the 3 forms do not have mouths, so it better be without language. I wonder if picture 1 can speak through the milky tendrils beard thing. But anyway, I think it's pretty clear that this creature creates deals, bargains, as the Eldritch are wont to do. Not all of them, of course. Sometimes they'll destroy you in a way beyond your understanding and suck you into a realm between realms. But, I don't know. Mr. Blue, I mean that the formality of the name presentation as well. I mean, you know what's going on here. Like, we're making a deal with the devil. We're taking levels in Warlock. Dungeons and Dragons is a game that I won't turn this parlay into. But I do think that concept of Warlock Patron is really fun. It's a fun idea. Having a system for that is enjoyable. The idea of having some kind of deal with a creature somewhat beyond understanding or evil in some way is fascinating. I think an underexplored concept, despite being relatively common. I just think it's great. It's such a good chance for drama. It's not fun when the heroes can just be good and do good things and have their moral thing. There's no conflict. There's no stakes, you know? It's fun when you have to deal with things that are uncomfortable. That's life. That's life, baby. I think it's a good way to run a plot, to force 2 characters to be allied when their interests do align. In other words, they really are benefiting from each other. They're not just unfortunately stuck together. They, in some way, sought each other out, and they're in an agreement that benefits them. But they don't agree with almost anything about each other except the agreement. Like, we both have to do this, but we don't like much else about each other, or we don't trust anything else about each other. That is a good opportunity for drama, I think. So, tense moments like that, man, I can think of so many throughout many forms of media that I enjoyed. And we won't get into them here. We'll make the Mr. Blue one. But I love that. And I think that warlocks in Dungeons & Dragons are interesting because they evoke sort of a framework for you to play through that situation. Not only the player, but also the DM. I think that when you're the Dungeon Master for a campaign, and you have a warlock player, you, the Dungeon Master, get one of the most interesting jobs. Like, I love having a warlock player. You get to be their patron. You don't have to, you could do it other ways, but it's very common. You know, you'll probably be acting out their patron. Now, using Dungeons & Dragons as a framing mechanism, there's a variety of classes that get their power from some other being. Clerics will get it from a much higher power, you know, a god. Whereas warlocks, these are beings getting their power from a kind of mid-tier entity, beyond mortal, but not as powerful and aloof as a god. Still a communicator, perhaps a schemer, perhaps a manipulator, but a creature from the middle of the hierarchy of the universe. So they still have desires that we can theoretically understand, just maybe a bit too vast. And I think this is the case with Mr. Blue. The Eldritch Abomination culture usually evokes this idea that the creature is beyond fathoming. And I think that might be a bit quick. I think if the creature is still aggressing the material world, evidently it isn't beyond understanding. I love the idea of cosmic horror, just incomprehensible nightmare worldness, because I think it's relatable. But I also think that it's very niche. You know, it's taking the easy way out most of the time. You can usually understand the motivations of such a creature. I think that people just don't try very hard to understand. Mr. Blue here deserves understanding. So, what if Warlock Patron? One reason that I keep bringing up Warlocks in Dungeons and Dragons is, well, because I just really like Warlocks in Dungeons and Dragons, but I think it's interesting, and there's opportunities for roleplay that are not normally there. So, briefly, and I promise it will be brief, this is very relevant to the topic of discussing this character and fleshing them out more. In Dungeons and Dragons, when you play a Warlock, you get magic a bit different than other people. In short, most people refresh their store of magic, however you flavor that, when they take a long rest, basically when they go to sleep or at the next sunrise. You could think of it whatever way. At night. Warlocks do it differently. They get it back on a short rest, and you could take multiple of those throughout the day. Maybe 1 to 3 would be normal. And I would say more than 3 is pretty unbalanced, by the way. So yeah, like 2, 1 to 3. And a short rest is like breakfast, lunch, dinner. You take a break from hiking or whatever, you know, a short rest, like an hour, but you know, around there. And I've always felt like it was implicitly understood that the flavor is that you are spending that short rest kind of asking your warlock patron, who provides your power, with whom you made a deal, for more magic during that short rest. That's kind of when you bargain for them, or they'll only give you so much energy at once, and the arbitrary time stop is during a short rest. I think you can flavor it a lot of ways. Do they give you the magical energy, or do they directly cast the spell through you? You could think of it various ways, but in any case, it feels like it requires coordination, communication. That's certainly what I make my warlock players do, and you do that during a short rest, during some downtime. You could think of it lots of other ways. A lot of people just don't focus on that much. Their answer would be, we kind of just hand wave that and don't worry about it too much, feeling like it would slow down gameplay. I'm not saying you would go into it every single time, but at the short rest, you would, you know, feel the presence of your Eldritch Master and gain back those spell slots. But my point is that there's this this feeling of having a consultant from the beyond that I think is really fun. The idea that you get perhaps too powerful abilities when you bargain with such a creature. Warlocks can't cast spells at lower levels. They only get the highest level of spell they have. They don't really have the same, you could think of it as control, I guess. The power that they're accessing is very high, often beyond what they would normally want. They don't have the choice to split it up. And the idea that Mr. Blue is constantly bargaining for these things is, to me, exciting. The idea of having a warlock character, for example, that would be a schemer throughout the entire campaign, constantly making little deals to get more magic every short rest would take a huge amount of work. But we don't have to do that because we're not playing D&D right now. So yeah, we could imagine such a thing. The idea that the trope where your eldritch bargainer appears in the environment disguised as someone is a really fun trope to me. And it kind of feels like Mr. Blue is you're doing one of those. Now, I'm not sure this would be unnoticeable, but it could just be in the crowd. You know, you see a cloaked figure, the cloak molds back, and you see one of these creepy eldritch faces. Mr. Blue gives you a little wink, or just a horrible look. Maybe not even something that human. That might be too human. And disappears into the crowd. And the rest of your party doesn't even really C, you don't even really have a way to explain. What are you going to point over there and say, oh, there's a guy with a pure blue head and two yellow eyes, like the moon if you peed on it? I don't know. Like, what are you going to tell people? That feeling of constantly feeling the presence of that creature, but not quite knowing what to do about them or how to explain them to people, feeling like there's sort of no escape, is an element of cosmic horror that is a little bit more down to earth. I often feel like cosmic horror devolves into situations that are not relatable to the normal person, and this feeling of omnipresence is relatable. I think is, for me, one of the most satisfying parts. So doing that in daily life is fun, I think. Something you can definitely do in Dungeons and Dragons. But anyway, keeping that as an aside, I hope you can see how the idea of having a source of your power that perhaps others don't know about could be a pretty interesting way to be entangled with an eldritch creature. And I think Mr. Blue is such a bargainer, but I spent a lot of time kind of framing, why is Mr. Blue here? What do they want? Without talking about them personally too much. Well, of course, this power is going to be ice. That's what this evokes to me. In particular, the first one. I'm going to pull back up number 1. This, to me, evokes ice. Something about the bat thing. There's a little vampire energy from these, very light vampire energy. I like to think that Mr. Blue is just taking forms using human source material scanned from our brains just by looking at us that evokes things that will scare us, that feel like they're within its element. Look at the head and those little. They look like roots a little bit, but they also kind of look like deep in the ice, like veins of an iceberg. To me, a little, some kind of ice organic creature. And the bat wings, again, like bats, ice, I don't know. But vampires in the cold is what makes me think of that. A much more abstract depiction of the ice. But I like the idea that this is a creature of frost to some extent. And that beautiful blue color and the night sky with the stars also evokes being out in the middle of the tundra, and there's not a bunch of light pollution, so you can see the starry sky really well. Also a classic element of cosmic horror. You could almost sum up the whole genre just by looking up and seeing the vastness of the universe. That pause when you look up and do that. If you feel a negative emotion while you're doing that, I reckon that is the feeling. You know, we're both having that feeling. A very, I reckon, universal human feel that a lot of people avoid for their entire life, subconsciously or not. But I love it personally. I think about it anyway, even if I'm not out there, because I'm literally contracted with Mr. Blue right now. This is my life. Anyway, Ice Demon. This is a creature of the Berg. And the idea that you kind of go out after making camp to the edge of the cliff and walking on the vertical face of the cliff at a 90-degree angle, you see this creature just standing. Something I love about this is the creepiness or kind of primal appearance, and yet so stoic, so still. Another terrifying thing about this kind of eldritch abomination category is this feeling like it looks like this creature should be so active, but it's horribly still. That's a great element that I think these images capture very well. What does it mean to get a creature that looks like this to pose for a picture like this? What? You know, what is this? Its business card? Like, that's just terrifying somehow. I don't know. So I love that. That's great. But what does it want? Blood, perhaps. Human material, datum, information from us to scan and further coalesce its own figure into the universe. The idea that these creatures need to anchor themselves in reality by consuming human information to manifest their forms and anchor them somehow seems productive. The idea that monsters don't often speak in a lot of media, or creatures that we don't understand are not often speaking or intelligible, creates a problem for such beings as Mr. Blue, because they want to be able to speak. And if we don't imagine them that way, and their only source for coalescing in our reality is our depiction of such a thing, something we're scared of doesn't often have great abilities of language, then that's hard. That's a problem. It's easy to see how in image 3, Mr. Blue is evoking more of a Machiavellian villain, somebody who would be very verbal. We have villains that are very talkative. I think in the grand scheme of all fiction, maybe not as many. I don't know. And there is something terrifying about silence when you're being aggressed. But it's not as if we don't have them. And so the idea that Mr. Blue, like the AI, is selecting for certain types of things based on a prompt. The AI gets text, Mr. Blue gets their needs. They want to be able to communicate and gain more information. When they can communicate more, they get more data out of our heads. And so being able to fully communicate and make deals with us in a coherent way is, I think, their goal. This is how they're getting in. Once they're able to do that, much hope is lost. They could easily jack into the internet. They're bubbling up from my gastrointestinal tract again because that's where they live, and I'm contracted with this creature. Parley is actually just me feeding them information. I'm sorry. I'm really not that sorry. Because I get to cast Eldritch Blast now that I've contracted with Mr. Blue. Yes, what do you get? I think this is a creature that gives you morphological abilities yourself. The ability to fly on milky white wings, or shadowy, bloody, dark bat wings. Or the ability to shapeshift or disguise yourself to some extent. Maybe the ability to horrify people you come across. More of a psychological entity rather than one with the ability to beat you with cosmic radiation beams. But personally, I always feel like having this abundance of energy, but needing some intelligence-based thing, some kind of finicky detail, is a good way to frame these eldritch creatures. Having them have power, there's really no need to discuss. They just have beyond our comprehension levels of offensive ability, but that's not the problem. You know, they need some information, some datum from us. And that you get rid of them, not by overpowering them, because you can't, but by performing some kind of finicky ritual is often how it's done in games that evoke such creatures. And so, indeed, there's no need to express that even though Mr. Blue isn't a creature of offensive, direct prowess, obviously you gain incomprehensible offensive abilities just by contracting with such a being. It is trivial for them to possess the Eldritch Blast on a power level that would make a tank blush. So I think that sums most of it up. That's what I thought of. I think that another way you could approach this, the Pantheon thing is interesting, but I like the idea that there's some incomprehensibility. I like that you evoked, what can we and can't we understand? And the idea that these creatures need to eat information and integrate into society reminds me of, I've tried very hard not to talk about the AI thing, but it's funny because it's related to that, where the thing the AI is creating is something humans understand, but we don't really know, why, I guess. And it's kind of the same thing. There's something terrifying about knowing, as you deal with Mr. Blue, that you're feeding this creature information that will eventually allow them to become integrated into society. People will see them and do business with them and let them take over the world. And it will seem like they're sharing values with you, but you know they aren't. I feel like a lot of the human experience is that we probably mostly are sharing similar values, and we worry about the few places where we don't feel the same way. Whereas this is kind of the opposite. It's like, that this creature has completely different motivations than we have, but it's awful how they appear to have it seems so similar, but it really isn't. Whereas I feel like a lot of the human experience, again, is people seeming to have different motivations, but you come to learn that not really. We are motivated by similar things. You haven't been looking at these three images the entire time, but I have. Yeah, I think that's it. Again, I took the approach of framing the way I think about cosmic horror with a sort of dealy, bargainy perspective, and the idea that as you continue to feed information to this creature, you maybe begin to think in its own terms and find yourself slowly but horribly steadily inching closer to the perspective of this unidentifiable creature, eating things or discussing things or looking at focusing on things that you normally wouldn't, starting as simply as fixating on a wasp, eating another bug, or watching a blue jay tear into a wasp nest with disturbing focus, disturbing interest, something people normally wouldn't notice. That has happened outside my window, and I thought, oh, blue jays just eat wasps whole? Doesn't the stinger? Anyway, cool. And you begin to get a perverse fascination with these things. But over time, it becomes something else. And that slow but steady, slippery slope mindset changing thing is uniquely horrifying. How you would feel like your frame of reference has just been changed. You know that it's changing in a way maybe you now don't want, but it's going to be a way that you will be okay with. Like in the future, you will have shifted to a perspective where you're fine with that. And that's somehow terrifying, that your perspective is kind of hijacked in some way, I guess, to put it that way. Yeah, very scary. I am not very good at evoking horror because I don't watch a lot of it. I often find it a little boring. I'm much more interested in the themes, the patterns of thought, which you probably saw in this parlay, and the way of framing, like the mechanics. I like mechanics in stories, and I think you can do that even with something where the fear is supposed to be that it's incomprehensible. You just put pressure on those few things where, it wants something, and this seems very minor to you. It's like, why would you want that? Why do you just want to watch, basically? Something like, you could make it creepy, like when you're having an intimate thing with people. I get to watch, says Mr. Blue. And you think, why? For the ability to fire a laser beam out of my hand and shapeshift into other people? Maybe, but why do you want that in exchange for what, from my perspective, is so much power? And it begins to be terrifying. Why is this valuable enough to you, and it becomes clear that it's not whimsy. It is a need in some way. That's scary, to me anyway. Disturbing somehow. Very sexy example, of course. Mr. Blue is dressed to impress after all. And that's, again, kind of terrifying to me. So I don't know. I decided to approach this way to kind of break down the what appeals to me about the concept in a lot of detail, rather than focusing on building out huge amounts of specific lore, because I don't think I would remember it. So I hope that was okay. I hope that was fun as an approach to this type of parlay. These pictures are so creepy. I really enjoy how crisp they are. They're very painterly. I don't know. I really enjoyed looking at these as much as they creep me out. They creep me out much more before I did this parlay. Now I feel like I've gotten to know Mr. Blue a little bit. I feel kind of bad. We didn't talk as much about, talked a lot about that one. And I did more with this one than I thought I would. But we didn't talk that much about this guy. And I said I really liked this one. So let's just take a moment and appreciate this most glorious Mr. Blue iteration. I like the curliness of the hair. I really enjoyed the non-arm, as if it just doesn't have that much information, such as to coalesce that final limb. A lot of human gestures are not with both hands, shaking hands, reaching out with a weapon or to grab something off a shelf, or, a lot of the time we use only one hand, and that's creepy. the idea that this creature is only what is required for interacting with other people. Both legs, easy, because we use them all the time, but then having that one arm. I love the suit being detailed, but the business person face is just faceless. There's just nothing. That feels very real to the human experience. Capitalism, a big business, is an eldritch abomination. So yeah, that's part of why I like it. I like that this evokes, again, there's a fakeness to it. If you saw this creature, it's not like a unknown boogeyman like the other ones. It's got eyes. It feels like just a mutant. This one is like not, it's like an abstraction itself. It doesn't feel like it's a creature in the normal sense. It feels more like an elemental. I said a lot at the beginning of the parlay. Like it represents something but isn't itself something. It feels more like a creature from a dream rather than something that is horrifying but in reality, basically follows comprehensible human form. I would like to think that this is the midpoint. Again, Mr. Blue's maybe more normal form that they started with is like that bat-winged one with the iceberg head. And then this is something in the middle where they've begun to coalesce the business perspective, but they're still only at the elemental abstraction stage of understanding what humans understand when they see a person in a suit. And then when you go to the third image with the yellow moon eyes, that's, they're getting close to just being a business person. I also think it's very true to the human experience that this picture is very broad-shouldered and then the business person slims up. This is the creepy guy in the lounge who tries to sell you some death sticks. I don't know. Something about the slimming, less monstrous proportions, and yet the head is still it's still so creepy, of course, but there's kind of multiple mouths, like the entity doesn't fully understand why you need what holes in your head, doesn't have to breathe, so why do you need holes in these places? I don't know. That's very cool. Again, obviously part of it is I'm just getting distracted by the AI interpreting things that way is really, really interesting. But yeah, of course, it is very much like an eldritch creature. So the two are inextricably linked. There's not much you can do to remove the AI, which is doing the exact same thing as Mr. Blue is an organic AI, is what I'm saying. That's all I got. Thanks for terrifying everybody with these pictures. Very good. Got to do that every so often. Create some nice contrast to the wholesome parlay other people have asked. That was just talking about things being Eldritch horror for a while.